Thank you very much, Elaine. Lifting operations, chainsaw, plant, what could possibly go wrong with the Chief Inspector looking outwards? This is my first time actually presenting at Rail Live. So I just want to say thank you to Elaine, Gemma and the team for inviting me to this event. And it is a beautifully hot sunny day in Warwickshire, as everyone knows. So please look after yourself as you go about the wonderful exhibitions and different bits and pieces that are on show here today. Just by way of background, I'm a relatively new appointment actually as the Chief Inspector. It's about a year since I came to post. I was the Deputy Chief Inspector before that, but about a year in post. So celebrate that anniversary at the end of the month. My background is probably slightly unusual in terms of coming to a Chief Inspector role. I was an apprentice once from school, electrical technician, started at the bottom as it were, making tea for 3 months. But I'm an engineer at heart, was really well supported through industry and by some very good people that looked after me through my apprenticeship, sponsored for a degree, got chartered, and I met my future employer, the Health and Safety Executive, through an intervention. That's a really interesting way to come into regulation. The company I worked for had 2 workplace fatalities in 3 years. They were people that I knew, they were people that I worked with, and they were people that I'd had sort of, drinks with their families and knew them. And for anyone who's been in and around that type of environment, you will understand just how impactful and profound that type of incident and situation can be. But I was really, kind of impressed by the regulator, not in terms of the prosecution they took, and the company deserved to be prosecuted. They're a company that I felt actually had a good health and safety culture and cared about people, but that wasn't the case. But what the regulator used to do back then was partner with industry to collaborate, to set goals, to get them to the standard. And it was that kind of intervention and that way of working that really convinced me that that was the way to go for my career. And I've been, really proud to have been a regulator now for almost 20 years and really proud to be the Chief Inspector. So Rail Live is a fantastic opportunity to bring the industry together. There are many thousands of people here today and yesterday. There is some wonderful kit to go and see. There are some fantastic people to go and talk to, and there's a great opportunity to learn, which is what I think a lot of people come here to do, and I'll be part of that today, walking around, which is really, really important. But the most important people here actually are our people. And that includes all of you. They're our greatest asset, actually, in the railways. It relies on you, on your colleagues out there, delivering a safe railway every single day to make it happen. And I just want to say thank you for what you do in respect of your roles and what you do in industry with your employer and colleagues. This talk is split into sort of 2 parts. I wanted to share some reflections from the last year, what I think in terms of the things that I've seen over the last 12 months. But then I'm going to move into looking forward to the future and some themes, 3 things that I think are really important for the industry to focus on as we move forward over the next sort of 12, 18, 24 months. One of the questions I get asked really regularly is, what does it feel like to be the Chief Inspector? And the answer to that varies day to day, to be honest, depending on what's happening and how I feel. But there's two overriding sort of reflections from me. The first is I feel really proud. So really proud to be the Chief Inspector of Railways. There is only one person in that post, that's me. It was Ian Prosser before me for 16 years, but it goes back, in fact, right back to Stevenson. It's got that kind of legacy through His Majesty's Railway Inspectorate all the way back to the sort of 1900s. So a really sort of long history and proud legacy, actually, of driving change and improvements over time. So I feel really proud. But the biggest feeling I have is one of a huge sense of responsibility. Okay, so this role is really important in terms of holding industry to standards, to making sure people go home safely, whether they're a passenger or worker, a member of the public or user of the system. We have a role in securing that. But we also have a sort of key role in terms of securing future improvements and collaboration, which I'll come on to in just a second. But I take those responsibilities really, really seriously. And I'm delighted to be here to talk about that here today. I suppose most people hear about us when we do something. So we do sometimes have to take enforcement action. So that might be an improvement notice where something needs to be improved to get it up to legal compliance and deal with an issue. It might be prohibition notice, which is where we see something that's so unsafe, we say, you need to stop here and now. And in a very few cases, we prosecute too. So we prosecute companies, we can prosecute individuals when things go wrong. And that tends to be the kind of thing that attracts attention and people see us in that way. And that's necessary. But for every one of those that we do, beyond that sort of hard right line, there are orders of magnitude many more things we do in the proactive space. So things like inspections, things like convening roundtables and forums, producing guidance, engaging with industry on visits with liaison, holding seminars, bringing people together, these types of things are all proactive interventions that are intended to sort of drive improvement and allow the industry to lead health and safety, which is when it's best done. And I suppose, as I sort of started, collaboration is really important to me. I think Ian Prosser built a sort of strong legacy of collaboration, was really keen for us to be part of industry, and I continue that sort of theme. And collaboration is going to be a really important part of my leadership going forward for ORR. You expect to see more of it. You expect to see us engaging in these types of things. And of course, we'll do the things we have to do when we need to for the right reasons. But there's a huge amount in the sort of proactive space that we do and we will continue to do. I don't know if any of you are track workers in the room. You might not be, but you will know track workers in your company, perhaps, in a Network Rail. And there were 2 prosecutions in the last 12 months that were concluded following the deaths of 2 track workers at Margam in South Wales back in 2019 and the death of a further individual at Surbiton in 2020. That resulted in multi-million pound fines where the company were rightly held accountable for their failings. But what's really interesting to look at is the improvement with regard to near misses and incidents involving track workers over time. So since that 5-year period when those tragic incidents happened and we served an improvement notice, there has been an absolute kind of shift in the way the industry manages risks on the railway for track workers. And those incident numbers, look at the data from RSSB, you will see the graph literally does that. That is a step change. That's not just because of the action we took, but it's part of the collaboration and the efforts of industry to kind of recognise the problem and take really strong action to address it. And that, for me, is probably the best example of all of those different tools that I've mentioned coming together to drive forward with change. Pick an important problem and fix it. Leave the rest alone. That's very much the kind of philosophy that I adopt as the Chief Inspector. You'll also know last year that there was a train collision incident at Tylwythig in mid-Wales where one person lost their life. And that is a really sobering reminder, actually, of how fragile everything can be and how sometimes very fine margins make the difference between something like that happening and on another occasion it being a spat, or perhaps not even that. It's really important. And 2 weeks before that, I was stood at the Ladbroke Grove Memorial Gardens early on a Saturday morning to remember those that lost their lives, suffered, impacted by the really tragic incident at Ladbroke Grove 25 years previously. Our industry has changed a lot since Ladbroke Grove and lots of the other events that define the way that we're structured and organised now. But it's really important that people are focused on delivering the day job. It's about today's railway, here and now. And there's got to be a relentless focus on making sure that the lessons and the learning from those past incidents aren't repeated, particularly at a time of reform. And I'll come on to that in a minute. Our industry is designed and set up in a way that we are today for very good reason. And people like Lord Cullen, who opined on those incidents, had a very kind of clear view about what the future looked like. And in my view, it has stood the test of time, and the industry is unrecognisably safer and better than it was 25 years ago. And everyone's come together to achieve some of that real progress. But we can't afford to be complacent. Just by way of examples in terms of the last year, to give you some insight in terms of the things that we found. We found a real issue with regard to structures. So things like bridges, things that support trains, things that support people, and some real gaps in terms of assessments and examinations. We've had an intervention on the back of that, which has led to improvements. But there was also a freight train derailment up at Audenshaw last year on a longitudinal bridge timber system where it failed. And again, failings in respect of maintenance, examination, inspection regimes that's been subject to an improvement notice. All of these things, if they're not managed properly, can result in catastrophic outcomes. And it's really important that the industry knows its assets, it understands them, and it's got fit-for-purpose systems to make sure that they're safe. That is absolutely essential. Occupational health I think featured yesterday here at this conference, remains in my view, stubborn issue. I don't know that health is necessarily given the same kind of standing in terms of safety, because safety is really obvious. You can see it, you can feel it, and I've mentioned some of those really impactful incidents. But yes, safety is not preferential to health. The two go hand in hand together, and it's important there's a real focus on that. And then I think about some of the welfare issues that were set out in the ASLEF Dignity for Drivers report. So people using hard hats to do particular things when they haven't got access to toilet facilities. Female colleagues having to do things on the side of the track, which really has no place in today's modern society. If we're going to build a modern, inclusive, diverse workforce that's representative of the people that we serve, and we want to attract younger people to the industry, we've got to address some of these really basic issues. And I'm convening a round table in London next week with senior leaders to talk about welfare facilities. This is really uncomfortable stuff to read, but it's not as uncomfortable for the people that have to do it day in, day out on the network. I'm going to turn to the future and sort of three things that I think are really, really important. So the first thing is about keeping today's railways safe, because that is about building the foundation for the future. That kind of requirement to operate safely is continuous. It doesn't change because of reform. And what we can't afford to have is people distracted by the very interesting thing that's happening over here with reform. All the talk, all the speculation, all the focus on the new world. We've got a thing to do here and now today, and that focus has got to be absolutely clinical in respect of delivering it. There's got to be clear accountability. Standards have got to be maintained. There needs to be continuous improvement as part of that, but also consistent delivery, not patchy delivery, not issues in particular locations. There's got to be a consistency with respect to it. The second thing I want to mention is about embedding safety at the heart of reform, because reform is happening. We've had one train operating company come into public ownership, and we facilitated that with our work on safety certificates and safety authorisations, but there's more to come. And this is only kind of phase one. This is about train operations. What it's not about is the real mashing together of infrastructure and train operations, and that's where the safety management system combination will be the really kind of important thing to get right as part of that. We're engaged in the design, but safety's got to be considered as part of that design and baked into it, both in terms of strategic design, but also in terms of implementation when it comes to the new organisation setting up and being rolled out. We need leadership accountability, and we also need resilience. The industry is very, very busy. I don't know anybody who doesn't have a list full of things to do every single day and beyond. But senior leaders have got to be given the chance to think through implications and make sure that design reflects reality and is deliverable and doesn't repeat some of those lessons and learnings from the past. The third thing that I think is really important is about enhanced collaboration across interfaces. So that for me is a really necessary safety leadership competence. Okay, safety leaders need to be able to collaborate across interfaces. There's never been a better time to explore some of that integrated risk management processes for leaders to come together to ensure greater alignment, and also really importantly to engage with stakeholders. That's employees, it's other companies, it's the supply chain, and it's trade unions plus others. Trade unions are really important in the design of the new system and have much to offer. We also need leaders to role model the behaviours and expectations we expect of the industry. So having humility, being open and being inclusive are really important features of senior leaders, and I'd encourage you all to adopt that as you move forward. I'm going to pause there because that's probably about 12 or 13 minutes of my 15-minute slot, but I'm really keen to have any questions and just take any points you particularly got. I just want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for the conversations I've had through the year with many people across the industry. My door is always open, and I do want to hear perspectives from the front line, having been on the front line myself at one point in time. And I'll hand over to Elaine for questions. Thank you.
So I'm going to throw it open to the audience. Does anybody have any questions for Richard? While you're thinking, I'll start off then. I was interested by your comment about your personal experience and why you became so passionate about what you now do. My career started in the chemical industry. I was a plant manager at a chemical plant. I spent one night going in an ambulance with one of the people that I was responsible for in the ambulance to take him to hospital when he thought he would never see again, because he'd been sprayed by a chemical that was a really unusual chemical. You won't have a clue what it is, because nobody has, pharmaceutical intermediate. And I had to go with him because I had to explain to the hospital what it was. I never wanted to be in that position again. And if there was ever a turning point for me, that was the point where I said, this is something that's really, really important to everybody. And as a manager, you never want to be the person who has to go and talk to the family, whether it's someone that's hurt themselves or someone that's been killed. And I thought, I never want to have to go and talk to a family of someone that's been killed. So it's really important, that personal experience. But I wanted to come back to the bit about reform and not losing people's perspectives, because we talked a little bit about that yesterday. So how do you see, what can we do, what can we all do to ensure that A, we don't lose people's attention, and B, that we maximise the opportunities of reform in terms of things like, sharing best practice? Because clearly by bringing some of the companies together, we're going to bring together, there must be some opportunities there for best practice.
Yeah, I agree. So the first thing is making sure that people are clinically focused on their roles and responsibilities, particularly when they're safety critical. That's absolutely essential. And I think every leader needs to set very clear expectations about what the boundaries are of individuals' roles, responsibilities in terms of daytime delivery. There also needs to be a forum and environment for people to engage in the design process, which is what's happening now. And there is a safety working group being led by a very senior industry sort of leader that's bringing together all the different parts of the system. That work is probably still ongoing. The end format is not defined, but there is a real chance, I think, to make sure some of the learning from the past is baked into that design. That's safety by design. That's what's really important. The other thing I just mentioned is the importance of culture. So I think safety culture is derived from business culture, and we had a conversation with a group of industry leaders earlier in the week around this, and I think there's a fantastic opportunity here to bottle the good stuff, but to also probably get rid of some of the stuff that we don't want. And I think that's going to be a huge journey for the industry as it comes together in the mainline railway. What we shouldn't also forget is that it's not just about the mainline railway. So we also have tram systems, we have London Underground, we have heritage railways, we have lots of other systems that might in some way be affected by reform, but it's not everything. But they also need to be sort of taken on the journey as part of that. And there's probably good things from those sectors that could also be transferred back the other way. So I think that's going to be quite important, Elaine.
So any questions for Richard?
Let's try one. So that's working, forgive me. I think everything that we're talking about is absolutely grand, and I'm not going to say any other way. But as a designer,
Yep.
okay, we would want to do your healthiest, safest solution in providing that. But what we may hear, or what might be a comeback to that, would be a minimum viable product.
Yep.
Do you find that a challenge in achieving your goals, say, when it comes to, obviously, the purse strings that will let us design that, should we say, goal product?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So the funding envelope is constrained. I think everyone knows that, and it's not what it has been. But what's not changed is the legal requirement that's needed to kind of specify the particular product that you need to design. And I think, so we have got some experience where perhaps the specification of particular assets is not what we'd expect, and we've had to sort of intervene to address some of that. But the other piece of work that we've done with our economic colleagues, because we're a combined health and safety and economic regulator, which creates an interesting tension internally, it basically reflects the challenge you're referring to in terms of that legal test of reasonable practicability. We've done some work to look at how industry tests reasonable practicability. So this is not a dilution of standards, but it's looking at how organisations go about that sort of process when it's finely balanced, whether it's novel, whether it's complex. And things like cost-benefit analysis, for example, are tools that are not particularly well understood by industry. There's greater need for consistency. And that's probably not a surprise, though, is it? Because I'd imagine the high 90% of health and safety interventions that an industry undertakes is through guidance, good practice, standards. But it's those finely balanced things where there needs to be greater consideration of some of those tools. And that's what this work is shining a light on. And there's a report that was published back in March that you can read to have a flick through that. But very happy to discuss it outside of this. You've got it. Great. Good.